Mriyate. Repeat the word. Mriyate.
Mriyate.
Dies. Va.
Va.
Either. Kadachit.
Kadachit.
At any time. Past, present, or future. Repeat.
At any time, past, present, or future.
Na.
Now.
Never.
Never.
Ayam.
Ayam.
This.
This.
Bhutva.
Bhutva.
Having come into being.
Having come into being.
Bhavita.
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 Will come to be.
Will come
Come
to
to
be.
be.
Va.
Va.
Or.
Or.
Now.
Now.
Not.
Not.
Bhuya.
Bhuya.
Or is again coming to be.
Or is again coming to be.
Aja.
Aja.
Unborn.
Unborn.
Nitya.
Nitya.
Eternal.
Eternal.
Sasvata.
Shashvata.
Permanent.
Permanent.
Ayam.
Ayam.
This.
This.
Prabhu. I'm sorry. Purana.
Purana.
The oldest.
Oldest.
Na.
Na.
Never.
Never.
Hanyate.
Hanyate.
Is killed.
Is killed.
Hanyamane.
Hanyamane.
Being killed.
Being killed.
Sarire.
Sarire.
The body.
The body.
For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. So please repeat.
For the soul.
For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time.
For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time.
He has not come into being,
He has not come into being.
and will not come into being.
And will not come into being.
He is unborn,
He is unborn.
eternal,
Eternal.
ever existing,
Ever
Ever
existing.
existing.
and primeval.
And
Primeval.
He is not slain when the body is
He
slain.
is not slain when the body is slain.
Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Okay, so I'll give it, somebody can read it. Who wants to?
Shall I read?
Go, yeah.
Qualitatively, the small atomic fragmental part of the Supreme Spirit is one with the Supreme. He undergoes no changes like the body. Sometimes the soul is called the steady or kutastha. The body is subject to 6 kinds of transformations. It takes its birth from the womb of the mother's body, remains for some time, grows, produces some effects, gradually dwindles, and at last vanishes into oblivion. The soul, however, does not go through such changes. The soul is not born, but because it takes on a material body, the body takes its birth. The soul does not take birth there, and the soul does not die. Anything which has birth also has death, and because the soul has no birth, he therefore has no past, present, or future. He is eternal, ever existing, and primeval, that is, there is no trace in the history of his coming into being. Under the impression of the body, we seek the history of birth, etc., of the soul. The soul does not at any time become old as the body does. The so-called old man, therefore, feels himself to be in the same spirit as in his childhood or youth. The changes of the body do not affect the soul. The soul does not deteriorate like a tree nor anything material. The soul has no byproduct either. The byproducts of the body, namely children, are also different individual souls, and owing to the body, they appear as children of a particular man. The body develops because of the soul's presence, but the soul has neither offshoots nor change. Therefore, the soul is free from the 6 changes of the body. In the Katha Upanishad 1.2.18, we also find a similar passage which reads, Na jayate mriyate va vipaschin nayam kutaschin na bhavuba kaschit ajo nitya sasvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. The meaning and purport of this verse is the same as in the Bhagavad Gita, but here in this verse there is one special word, vipaschit, which means learned or with knowledge. The soul is full of knowledge and full always with consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Even if one does not find the soul within the heart, where he is situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to the clouds or for some other reason, but the light of the sun is always there and we are convinced that it is therefore daytime. As soon as there is a little light in the sky early in the morning, we can understand that the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. This consciousness of the soul is, however, different from the consciousness of the Supreme, because the Supreme Consciousness is all knowledge, past, present and future. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna. But Krishna is not like the forgetful soul. If so, Krishna's teachings of Bhagavad Gita would be useless. There are two kinds of souls, namely the minute particle soul, Anu Atma, and the super soul, Vibhu Atma. This is also confirmed in the Katha Upanishad 1.2.20 in this way. Anor aniyan mahato mahiyan atmasya jantor nihito guhayam tam akratu pashyati vita soko dhatu prasadan mahimanam atmana. Both the super soul Paramatma and the atomic soul Jivatma are situated on the same tree of the body within the same heart of the living being, and only one who has become free from all material desires as well as lamentations can, by the grace of Supreme, understand the glories of the soul. Krishna is the fountainhead of the super soul also, as it will be disclosed in the following chapters, and Arjuna is the atomic soul, forgetful of his real nature. Therefore, he requires to be enlightened by Krishna or by his bona fide representative, the spiritual masters.
Najayati mriyate vakadachinaya buddhavavitavana bhuya ajo nitya sasvatam yam purana nahanyate hanyamahasya. This is a fundamental problem that we have, is the difference between our soul and our body. And when we try and understand Krishna, we assume that Krishna is like us. He has a body, we have a body. But our body is different than the soul. So Krishna's body should be different than his soul. But that's a mistake. Krishna is not, the soul and body are the same. Whereas we are not. Therefore, every time we change our body, we forget who we were before. And even in this body, we forget who we are also. Like every night we go to sleep, we forget who we are. When we wake up, we forget what we experienced in our sleep. So our disease is forgetfulness. But Krishna doesn't have that disease. And we mentioned this last week, but we'll mention it again. Arjuna asked Krishna a question. He says, 4th chapter, 4th verse, Arjuna vacha aparam bhavato janma param janma vivas prataha katam etad vijaniyam tvam ado proktavam iti. He says, the sun god Vivaswan is senior by birth to you. How am I to understand that in the beginning you instructed this science to him? Well, when it says in the beginning, that's a big statement. If we look in the purport to 4th chapter, 1st verse, in the 4th paragraph of the purport, and Prabhupada says, at the present moment we've passed about 5,000 years in Kali Yuga. The previous age to Kali Yuga was 864,000 years. And previous to that, it was over 1,200,000 years. So, if you look at paragraph 3, he quotes a verse from the Mahabharata, which says, "In the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, this science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivaswan to Manu." Well, when it says in the beginning of the millennium, Manu lives for approximately 72 cycles of 4 ages. A little bit more than 72 cycles. So, one cycle of 4 ages, that is Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali Yuga, is 4,300,000 years. And Manu lives 72 of those cycles. So it says here that in the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, this science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivaswan to Manu. So originally Krishna spoke this Bhagavad Gita to Vivaswan. That's in the beginning. Okay. So then Vivaswan spoke to Vivaswan spoke to Manu, and then Manu spoke to Ikshvaku. So it says here, in the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, this science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivaswan to Manu. Manu, being the father of mankind, gave it to his son, Maharaj Ikshvaku, the king of this earth planet, and forefather of the Raghu dynasty in which Lord Ramachandra appeared. So Ramachandra appeared in the Treta Yuga, right? So, therefore, Vivaswan spoke to Manu over 2 million years ago. More than that. And then Manu spoke to Ikshvaku. So we can assume that Manu, the Bhagavad Gita has been present on the earth from the time of Ikshvaku. So that would be approximately 2,005,000 years ago. Sometime in the beginning of Treta Yuga. Then he says, at the present moment, we have just passed through 5,000 years of Kali Yuga, which lasts 432,000 years. Before this, there was Dwapara Yuga, 800,000 years. And before that, there was Treta Yuga, 1,200,000 years. Thus, some 2,005,000 years ago, Manu spoke Bhagavad Gita to his disciple and son, Maharaj Ikshvaku, the king of the planet Earth. Now, he says, the age of the current Manu is calculated to last some 305,300,000 years, of which 120,400,000 have passed. Accepting that before the birth of Manu, the Gita was spoken by the Lord to his disciple, the sun god Vivaswan. A rough estimate is that the Gita was spoken at least 120,400,000 years ago, and in human society has been extant or existent for 2 million years. So that's sort of the history of Bhagavad Gita, right? Now, here, Krishna says, you told me that you spoke this Bhagavad Gita to Vivaswan. And so, that would be like 120 million years ago, right? So he says, but you're only like 125 years old. Now this is 5,000 years ago. So how is this possible? So Krishna says, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani tavat charjana Tanyaham Veda Sarvani Natvam Veda Parantapa. This 4th chapter, 4th verse, 5th verse. It says, Krishna says, many, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. So this is the difference between Krishna and us. We cannot remember all our births. We can't even remember last week. But Krishna can remember all of his appearances and activities, because he doesn't really change his body. He and his body are the same. Whereas we have a body that's different than our soul, and therefore we lose cognizance of who we were in a previous life. That's one difference between us and Krishna. Now, we can obtain our real spiritual body by purification of our consciousness. And when we become completely purified, then our spiritual body manifests. In other words, we spiritualize this body by engaging it in Krishna's service. And after we leave this body, if we're perfectly Krishna conscious, then we assume our original spiritual form. But it's not made of matter anymore. It's pure Satchitananda. So right now, our body is covering the soul. Now we have a specific form of our body. It's certain kind of eye, ear, nose, and everything. This is based on our previous karma. But it is covering something. And therefore, it has a particular form. In other words, if you make a doll, you have to have some structure on the inside around which you make the doll. So that structure is formed by the activities we performed in previous lifetimes and the consciousness we developed. So activities means karma, and consciousness means what we were meditating on or thinking about most of the time. So those two criterions determine what kind of body we're going to get. But as soon as we are born, we forget everything of our past. And therefore, at the moment of death, we pray to Krishna to remember all the good things we did for him. And we will see those things also coming before our eyes. And if we didn't do any good things, then we'll see all those nonsense things that we did and not be completely ignorant of Krishna at the moment of death. So, therefore, it's important to develop, through devotional service, a spiritual memory. I remember when Prabhupada was nearing leaving his body, or even as the movement developed, and Prabhupada would always talk about all the experiences he had earlier in establishing Krishna consciousness. And it was all wonderful memories, and how we had to struggle, but it wasn't like he was remembering not as something horrible, but as it was part of his ecstasy of serving his guru. So, but I can compare that to my father, who was dying of cancer, and every once in a while he would think about his life, and he would cry, because most of it was, not very pleasant. So, when you pass your life in Krishna consciousness, generally you'll have all good memories. And you'll see how everything was sort of connected to where you are now. Because if you stay in Krishna consciousness, then you have a continuity of devotional service. And that is the consciousness that takes you back to Godhead. But if we have, memory of all kinds of horrible things we did, then we stay in this material world. So it's important to develop the spiritual consciousness, and that will lead us to evolving our eternal spiritual body, depending on the type of relationship we relish with Krishna. Okay, so this verse 20, chapter 2, verse 20, is very important because it establishes that the soul is never born and it never dies. This is another adjustment we have to make in our understanding of life. Everyone thinks I was born at a certain time, I've lived for a certain period, and then I'm going to die. It's not true. It only pertains to the body, not to the soul. If we think that that is real life, you're born, you stay for some time, and then you die, then we have a very, very limited understanding of life and the purpose of life. And because of that, we will limit ourselves in our potential in this lifetime. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day who's a scientist, he's a nuclear scientist. And we were talking, and he said, but even though he's got that education, he actually works for Microsoft, an IT guy. He's a very smart man. And we were talking, and he said, we were talking about, how the scientists are nonsense. And he says, you're right. He says, that's why I decided not to stay in science. I said, why? He said, because Krishna already has made the world perfect. There's nothing I can discover in science that'll make the world better. In fact, probably whatever I discover in science will make it worse. So why should I engage in that kind of activity? So I thought that was very interesting, that he came to that conclusion by reading, Prabhupada's books, that, why should I engage in all this scientific research when the world is already perfect, right? Of course, people don't live in harmony with the natural rhythms of life. But here's a person who realized that whatever Krishna has created is already perfect. So there's nothing I can make better. Therefore, what I can work with better is make myself perfect in Krishna consciousness. Okay. So this is an adjustment we have to make. We have to understand that, first of all, our soul is 1/10,000th the tip of a hair, extremely small. Because of that, you can't kill it. You can't even see it. How are you going to kill something you can't see? The body, of course, can die, but I'm not this body. I'm a pure soul. And Krishna is smaller than I am, and smaller than you. He's in the heart of our soul. Soul is in the heart of the body, and Krishna is also present in the heart, but he's also present in the heart of the soul. So just imagine these dimensions, right? And then Krishna, also in the universal form, contains everything. So we cannot even begin to understand how great Krishna is. We can only get an idea of it by reading Bhagavad Gita. If we believe this, then it changes the way we look at life and what our purpose in life should be. So here he says, both the super soul Paramatma and the atomic soul Jivatma, this is the last paragraph of 220, are situated on the same tree of the body within the same heart of the living being, and only one who has become free from all material desires as well as lamentations can, by the grace of the Supreme, understand the glories of the Lord. Well, these are the two things that disturb our mind and keep us from focusing it on Krishna. We have material desires. And that means we have desires to have something we don't have. And we have material lamentation. That means we lost something that we were attached to. And we're lamenting. So that's called sochati and kankshati. As long as we are affected by sochati and kankshati, we will not understand the nature of the soul and will not understand anything about Krishna. So, only one who has become free from all material desires as well as lamentations can, by the grace of the Supreme, understand the glories of the soul. Krishna is the fountainhead of the Supersoul also, as it will be discussed in the following chapters. And Arjuna is the atomic soul, forgetful of his real nature. Therefore, he requires to be enlightened by Krishna, or by Krishna's bona fide representative, the spiritual master. So in other words, we have no idea of the dimension of our soul. We have no idea how great Krishna is. We have no idea of hardly anything, right? So unless we meet bona fide spiritual master and masters also, and receive bona fide knowledge, originally spoken by Krishna, we'll never understand anything in life. We'll just go along with many, many misconceptions, and because of that, we'll be disturbed all the time by sochati and kankshati, hankering for things we don't have, and lamenting for things that we have lost. And if you look and you do a survey, do an objective survey, most people, it can be your relatives, it can be co-workers, it can be friends, most people are doing these two things all the time. Desiring something they don't have, lamenting for something they lost. Would you agree to that? Yeah. Yeah. And as long as a person is like that, you can't understand anything about the soul or Krishna. You can try, but you won't understand. Because your mind will always be distracted by something you don't have that you're desiring, or something you had and you lost. And you lament. You see? So this is a good way to see a summary of everyone's life in the material world. Everyone's life is going between sochati and kankshati. Desiring things you don't have, kankshati. Lamenting for things that we lost. Now besides that, everyone is always troubled by happiness and distress, riches and poverty, fame and infamy, heat and cold, knowledge and ignorance, good and evil. You see. All these things are troubling us all the time. And how can we overcome it? Well, only by learning this knowledge and then living this knowledge. Learning the knowledge is not good enough. Theoretical knowledge is not good enough to become free of the material nature. You can know everything, but if you don't practice it, it has no value. Just like sometimes there's a person who's got a PhD, but he's driving a taxi. So what good was that PhD, all the trouble he went through to get it, if he's just driving a taxi? So the same way, someone can know Bhagavad Gita, but unless they become a devotee and practice the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, it has no value. So theoretical knowledge is insufficient for attaining pure love of Krishna. Okay, so now we'll go on to verse 21. Any questions about this verse or purport?
Prabhuji, why we are called spirit soul? Why not just soul? Many times I have read it on a spirit soul.
Well, they're trying to translate a word, Sanskrit, into English. Now in English, there's a confusion between spirit and soul. You see this if you listen to Christian preachers. They draw a distinction between the two. Have you ever heard it?
Spirit means
Holy Spirit, right? And soul.
No.
unliberated soul is spirit.
Evil spirits.
Yeah, I should bring my phone. Okay, let's look it up on the internet.
Internet phone?
Yeah.
Spirit and
So
Good. The Christian differentiation between spirit and soul. Right there. Christian differentiation between spirit and soul.
it's like in the meantime, can I ask the questions?
You what?
In the meantime, can I
Yeah, go ahead.
So here in the purport, soul is referred to as he.
Yeah.
Why he? Meaning,
This is just a conventional way of
Okay.
speaking in English.
okay, does not indicate gender.
No.
Okay.
spirit is
There is no simple answer to this question because the words soul and spirit are employed in varying senses within the different biblical contexts in which they may be found. The following represents a very brief summary of some of these major uses. The soul. The Hebrew term for soul is nephes. And that's the Arabic word too, nafis. They pronounce it differently in Hebrew. And it is found more than 780 times in the Old Testament. Because of the variety of contextual meanings, it is not always rendered by the English word soul. The King James Version uses 28 different words by which to translate the original term. Nephes, therefore, signifies different things depending upon the passage in which it occurs. Similarly, in the Greek New Testament, the original word for soul is pursush, found 103 times. Our modern psychology derives from this Greek term. Here are some uses of the soul in the scriptures. Soul may signify merely an individual person. Anyway, you see, there's a difference of meaning between soul and spirit in the way Christians use the word. So when Prabhupada translates the word spirit soul, it's to say that there's no difference between the two words. Whereas whenever you hear a Christian preacher, sometimes they'll say the soul is one thing and the spirit is something else. Do you understand? That's the answer to your question.
the soul is used for person and spirit is used for the non-physical being. Sometimes for person.
Okay, that's... You try and figure that out. Non-physical being is the soul.
You cannot see.
Yeah, it's,
So is it the subtle body she is referring to?
now you see, we're going to get into this discussion now, where it can be many different things. That's why Prabhupada says spirit, soul. They're the same thing. Whereas in English, the soul can refer to a person and the spirit is to the non-physical being. Well, that means it's drawing, the soul is referring to what? The body? But you're not even sure because it says the person. So in Sanskrit, there's no difference between soul and spirit. But in English, and because of the Christian hodgepodge, there's a difference between the two. Okay. So therefore Prabhupada put the two words together. So it refers to not the body, not the person, but the soul. The soul is the person, the real person, and the body is not the real person. Now, even in Sanskrit, there's a slight confusion because when you say Atma, Atma can refer to the body, the soul, or the mind, depending on the context. So again, even in Sanskrit, there's a little confusion. Right? So, like for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, it says, Okay, 6th chapter, 7th verse. Jitatmana prasantasya. So Jita Atmana, one who has conquered his mind. So here, Atma is referring to the mind. You see that?
No.
Jivatmana prasantasya, 6th chapter, 7th verse. So if you learn 6th chapter, 5th verse, it says, Udared atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayat atmaiva hi atmano bandhu atmaiva ripur atmana. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So, here we see the word Atma used many times in a verse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, 7 times it's used. Right? But in certain sentence, in certain context, it's body, or mind, or soul. Right? So here in the Purport Prabhupada says the word Atma denotes body, mind, and soul, depending upon different circumstances. Now, we all know there's a difference between the body and the mind and the soul. But here's one word that can have 3 meanings depending on the context. Well, in English also, the Christians have defined the difference between spirit and soul. You see. So, depending on the context. So you see that there can be confusion even in Sanskrit unless you're an expert. So here he says, the word Atma denotes body, mind, and soul, depending upon different circumstances. In the yoga system, the mind and the conditioned soul are especially important, since the mind is the central point of yoga practice. Atma refers here to the mind. The purpose of the yoga system is to control the mind and to draw it away from attachment to sense objects. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the mire of nescience. So he's talking about the mind and the soul. So even in the verse, Atma refers to the mind, and in one line it refers to the soul. In fact, the pure soul, in material existence, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved with the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. Therefore, the mind should be trained so that it will not be attracted by the glitter of material nature, and in this way, the conditioned soul may be saved. Okay, so anyway, whenever it says spirit, soul, it refers not to the body, not to the mind, but it refers to the soul. And whenever it refers to the mind, right, well, in English there's different words, so there's no confusion there. And the body, it's a different word, there's no confusion. But in English, there is a confusion between spirit and soul. So therefore, he names the soul spirit soul. Right? So in Sanskrit, unless you understand it very well, you could get confused whether it's referring to the body, the mind, or the soul. And in English, you get confused. If you're translating from Sanskrit to English, you get confused because in English, there can be a difference between spirit and soul. So Prabhupada puts those 2 words together so you can't make that mistake. Otherwise you'll be thinking, does he refer to spirit or soul? Because spirit is the non-physical being and the soul is the body. That's in English. Soul is the physical being, right? So you see that there could be If you're translating from Sanskrit to English, you could get confused. If you're translating from English to Sanskrit, you can get confused. So in English, you have a different word for mind, body, and soul. In Sanskrit, you have one word that denotes all three. And when you're translating from Sanskrit to English, you could get confused because in English they differentiate between spirit and soul. Okay. Yeah. All right, so now we're on verse 21. Any more questions? So did I answer your question was?
So here in this purport, soul is referred to as he.
He, yeah.
So is there a gender associated to the
No.
soul?
No, it's just a convention by referring to he. Nowadays, because of feminism, they'll write, he said that there can be a confusion in life, and okay, wait a minute. Okay, so they're going to use the personal pronoun after feminism, he or she, right? Whereas before, by convention, they only used he,
Yes.
you know. So an example would be, okay, the soul is a very complicated concept to understand. He is referred to sometimes as the non-physical being and sometimes as the body. So they would say, the soul is a very complicated concept to understand in English. She is referred to sometimes as he. You know, that's the way they write now.
Yeah.
You know, they don't say he all the time. Sometimes they use she.
Yeah.
You know, so that's, you know, gender neutrality. Okay, so
I have a question.
yes,
So it said that a soul, when it's in the womb, can remember all the miseries of birth and praise to Lord that I will not take birth again. So why does
no, praise God. No, the soul is praying to get out of the womb
right?
because the womb is miserable also. He's praying, you get me out of here, I pray I will never forget you. Of course, right as soon as they're born, they forget.
So why is that they forget at the time of after they're born?
Because normally, birth is very traumatic experience. I mean, you ever see a baby as soon as they're born?
Yeah.
They cry.
No, besides crying. They have a ring. If it's a normal birth, they have a ring where they were squeezed as they came down, and it changes the shape of the head. But fortunately, the baby's head is soft, and then later on it expands and comes back. Because, you know, it's just like if I put your head in a vice and I started tightening the vice, you'd go crazy with pain, right? Well, that's what happens to the baby, and that pain causes them to forget everything. Just like if your head was put in a vice and they started tightening it, you would go crazy with pain, you'd forget everything.
But it happens by Lord's will, right? That they forget. Like even if it's traumatic.
Yes.
Okay.
Now the question is, what happens if there's a cesarean?
Do they still forget it?
Huh?
Do they still forget
They
it?
still forget.
In that case, they perhaps choose to forget it.
No, they still will forget.
So Prabhuji, this pain is just only for Jivatma, they feel it, or one also feels pain?
Well, he-
Sutta Shukdev Goswami didn't forget, right? Anything?
No, he didn't forget. But he was a liberated soul in the womb. Inside the womb, he was already a liberated soul.
Prahlad Maharaj also remembered everything, Prabhu, or just to inculcate?
Prahlad Maharaj, life was saved by Krishna. in the womb of his mother. Right, so he had some, well, no, also he was, I'm sorry, Parikshit Maharaj's life was saved in the womb of his mother. So he actually saw Krishna for a very short period of time. That's why his name is Parikshit. He's examining the world, trying to find Krishna again. Right? He's an examiner. Now, Prahlad Maharaj, his life was saved by Krishna, right? But in the womb, he was educated by Narada Muni. You see, he was educated by Narada Muni, so he became a devotee in the womb of his mother, which proves that there is prenatal consciousness of children in the womb. It's possible to educate them already, even before they come out into the world. Okay. So now, any more questions, or we'll go to verse 21?
So there is a transition, right? One body, when the soul leaves one body and takes the another body.
Yes.
How does that transition, like what are the states of that transition? Or does it go through any transformations there? Or?
Well, you develop a certain consciousness, right, in this lifetime. And you'll have, a mixed, usually normal people have a mixed bag of sinful activities and some pious activities. But their main orientation, even for the pious activities, was to improve their sense gratification. So therefore, they will not see Krishna. They will not be thinking of Krishna at the moment. So here's what happens. If you look on the second, let me see here.
Prabhuji, if I'm not wrong,
What's that?
I think in some of the Puranas, the transition of the soul is mentioned, I guess, in detail. About where the soul goes, in after how many hours, where does it go?
Yeah, we got it in WhatsApp, right?
So,
Somebody
I
said.
think I have read it on internet. In some of the Puranas, it's explained in detail. But it's taken by Yamudutas to different places. Then he is reminded of his activities.
It was specified in Garuda Purana.
Garuda Purana.
Yeah.
It is actually, it was written in that Purana that the soul decides what is the birth it will take, what kind of body, what kind of position. Because it remembers that what are the good or bad, sins are.
The soul decides, body for itself.
Yeah.
But I
No,
think
it's not true.
Yeah.
It's soul in the sense the pure soul is not, but the subtle body remembers the karmas. And
That's not true. The next body is determined by Krishna through Yamaraj.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe actually there is different ways to understand it, right? Because you get the next body, but depending upon your desire. So you are actually contributing to it, right? A little bit.
but it's a message product. I don't know the truth. I haven't read Garuda Purana, but that
In Garuda Purana, what I have heard is like, after the
Okay, if you look at 15th chapter, verse number 8, 9, and 10.
15th chapter, Prabhuji, you said? 8, 9, 10.
You can read that now. 15:8. Go ahead.
Read the purport and the just the translation
Verse and purport.
verse and the purport. Okay. Sariram yad avapnoti yatchapi utkramakishvara krihat vaitani samyati vayur gandhan iva sayat. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. So that's verse 8. Shall I read the purport of this?
Yes.
Okay. Here the living entity is described as Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depends upon him. At the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him on to the next type of body. If he has made his consciousness like that of a cat or dog, he is sure to change to a cat's or dog's body. And if he has fixed his consciousness on godly qualities, he will change into the form of a demigod. And if he is in Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka in the spiritual world and will associate with Krishna. It is a false claim that after the annihilation of this body, everything is finished. The individual soul is transmigrating from one body to another, and his present body and present activities are the background of his next body. One gets a different body according to karma, and he has to quit this body in due course. It is stated here that the subtle body, which carries the conception of the next body, develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called karshati, or the struggle for existence.
Alright, next verse. Someone read it.
8, 9,
Shall I read or somebody else?
I don't know. Anybody want to read? Okay.
The living entity thus taking
Okay, go ahead. Read.
Shall I? Okay.
No, not sure. Good.
Shotram Chakshus Parshanam Cha Rasanam Dhyanam Cha.
Okay, wait a minute. Go ahead.
From Sanskrit is hard for me. I can read.
No, read the English.
The living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. In other words, if the living entity adulterates his consciousness with the qualities of cat and dog, in his next life he'll get a cat or dog body and enjoys.
I'm just speaking about that. This is one person comes to our Saturday night program. He came for the first time last Saturday, and he was telling me that both he and his wife were allergic to cats. But in spite of that, his wife sleeps with the cat, and he sleeps in a different room. And I was saying, I asked, does this cat sleep in the same bed? He said, yes. Now, you know how unhealthy that is to sleep with an animal? Extremely unhealthy, especially a cat or a dog. They're completely covered with all kinds of germs and unclean things. First of all, they're meat eaters, both of them. And they're, they don't have a diaper or anything like that. So anything that comes out in the bed. And they have different types of viruses and things like that they are immune to, but human beings are not necessarily immune to those viruses that they carry and germs. So, very, very unhealthy thing to sleep with the animal right in your bed. I knew one person who slept with a lizard, and the lizard was in the bed. I couldn't believe it, you know. And the lizard was not a little thing like it was a big thing like that. And it's crawling around the bed, you know. It's unbelievable. Go ahead.
Consciousness is originally pure, like water. But if we mix water with certain color, it changes. Similarly, consciousness is pure. For the spirit soul is pure, but consciousness is changed according to the association of material qualities. Real consciousness is Krishna consciousness. When therefore one is situated in Krishna consciousness, he is pure, he is in his pure life. But if his consciousness is adulterated by some type of material mentality, in his next life,
In the next life.
he gets a corresponding body. He does not necessarily get a human body again. He can get the body of a cat, dog, hawk, demigod, or one of many other forms, for there are 84 million species.
8,400,000. So we can see that the next body is going to be determined by the consciousness we have developed. And it depends on the desires that we have. And it depends a lot on, you know, whether we're free of lamentation, desire and lamentation. If we're not, then our mind is going to be filled with many contaminated thoughts. And you can see how most people die in ignorance and they take birth again in different types of bodies. Now I'll read the next one. The next one is very interesting. Anyone want to read?
उत्क्रामन्तस्थितं वापि भूज्ञानं वा गुणान्वितं विमूढानानु पश्यन्ति ज्ञानचक्षुषः.
The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. For the word
Jnana Chaksusa.
Jnana Chaksusa is very significant. Without knowledge, one cannot understand how a living entity lives his present body, nor what form of body he is going to take in the next life, nor even why he is living in a particular type of body. This requires a great amount of knowledge understood from Bhagavad Gita and similar literatures heard from a bona fide spiritual master. One who is trained to perceive all these things is fortunate. Every living entity is quitting his body under certain circumstances. He is living under certain circumstances, and he is enjoying under certain circumstances, under the spell of material nature. As a result, he is suffering different kinds of happiness and distress under the illusion of a sense enjoyment. Persons who are everlastingly fooled by lust and desire lose all power to understand their change of body and their stay in a particular body. They cannot comprehend it. Those who have developed the spiritual knowledge, however, can see the spirit is different from the body and is changing its body and enjoying in different ways. A person in such knowledge can understand how the conditioned living entity is suffering in this material existence. Therefore, those who are highly developed in Krishna consciousness try their best to give this knowledge to the people in general, for their conditional life is very much troublesome. They should come out of it and be Krishna conscious and liberate themselves to transfer to the spiritual world.
So very few people understand this change of body, how it's happening, and they have no control at all. And they're just preoccupied with this desire and lamentation, and all the different dualities in life. They don't have any time to think deeply about what the purpose of life is, how to attain that goal. Nothing. Nothing. And there are many people who may have some knowledge, but it's just theoretical knowledge. They don't know how to actually, like for example, I may theoretically know how to build an atomic bomb, but can I build one? I might know in theory how to do it, but can I actually do it? Very few people can actually do it. Many people can understand the theory, but to actually do it requires a great endeavor, right? You have to get all the right, constituents. You have to have highly specialized equipment. You need the collaboration of a lot of different people. Well, who can do it? Can you make an atomic bomb? No, you have no possibility. So just theoretical knowledge about, oh yeah, you can control your next birth by, doing this or that. It's a bunch of nonsense. You can't, unless you become Krishna conscious, you can't control anything. The whole Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is a famous book studied by Tibetan Buddhists. It explains how you can control your next birth. Right? It's nonsense. All the hippies used to read that book in the 1960s and 70s. They would smoke marijuana and read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And know how to, and talk about how they can control their next birth. It's complete nonsense. What?
The book name?
Tibetan Book of the Dead. So it's a book that explains how you can control your next birth. Tibetan Book of the Dead. Did you see it?
He's making note of it.
You're writing the book or what?
If you want to know the truth, we need to know what is not true also.
Anything that's not in the Bhagavad Gita is not true. Did you find it?
No, I just made a note.
Oh. I thought you were looking.
No.
You know how to spell Tibetan? Tibetan.
Is it purely Tibetan, bro? Not in English? Somebody might have translated.
No, it's been translated. It's been translated a long time ago. But people read it and they think they can have control over the whole thing. It's nonsense. They don't have any
Like
control.
in Bhagavatam, one story is that Jadabharata,
Who? Jad Bharat?
Jadabharata, at the time of that he remembers the deer and he gets the form of a deer. So you never know what thoughts you are.
Yeah, he didn't plan that.
Yeah, he didn't plan that. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
this book is not going to hold true.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're on text 21, second chapter, text 21. Veda vinasinam nityam
Veda vinashinam nityam
ya enam ajamavyayam katam sa purusha partha
Katam sa
Purusha Partha
kam gatayati hantikam.
Kamgayati
Veda
Veda.
knows avinasi,
Avinashi,
indestructible,
indestructible,
nityam,
Nityam,
always exists.
always existing.
I'm sorry, always existing.
always existing.
Ya,
Yeah,
one who,
one who,
enam,
Enam,
this
this
soul,
so
ajam,
Ajam,
unborn,
Anmar,
avyayam,
Avyayam,
immutable.
immutable,
Immutable means it never changes. Katam,
Katam,
how,
how,
saha,
Sa,
that,
that,
purusha,
Purushaha,
person,
person,
partha,
Partha,
O partha,
Partha,
Arjuna,
Arjuna,
come,
come,
whom,
whom,
gatayati,
Gatati,
causes to hurt,
causes to hurt,
hanti,
Hanti,
kills,
kills,
come,
come,
whom.
whom,
Translation, O partha, how can a person who knows that the soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? Please repeat. O partha,
O Partha,
how can a person who knows
how can a person who knows
that the soul is indestructible,
The soul is indestructible,
eternal,
eternal,
unborn,
unborn,
and immutable.
and immutable.
Kill anyone,
Kill anyone,
or cause anyone to kill.
or cause anyone to kill.
Okay, who wants to read the book?
I'll read.
Go ahead.
Everything has its proper utility, and a man who is situated in complete knowledge knows how and where to apply a thing for its proper utility. Similarly, violence also has its utility, and how to apply violence rests with the person in knowledge. Although the justice of the peace awards capital punishment to a person condemned for murder, the justice of the peace cannot be blamed, because he orders violence to another person according to the course of justice. In Manu Samhita, the law book for mankind, it is supported that a murderer should be condemned to death, so that in his next life he will not have to suffer for the great sin he has committed. Therefore, the king's punishment of hanging a murderer is actually beneficial. Murderer is actually beneficial. Similarly, when Krishna orders fighting, it must be concluded that violence is for supreme justice, and thus Arjuna should follow the instruction, knowing well that such violence committed in the act of fighting for Krishna is not violence at all, because at any rate the man, or rather the soul, cannot be killed. So for the administration of justice, so-called violence is permitted. A surgical operation is not meant to kill the patient, but to cure him. Therefore, the fighting to be executed by Arjuna at the instruction of Krishna is with full knowledge, so there is no possibility of sinful reaction.
So, Partha, how can a person who knows that soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? Yeah, well, see, this is, there are always situations that test our comprehension. So, in this case, see, Arjuna didn't want to fight because he was attached to his family members. But Krishna's ordering him to fight. And Krishna's trying to convince him that, look, these people are already dead because they were not following the principles of religion, so I've actually already killed them. But you just become the instrument for my will. And in any case, he's telling Arjuna, they're not actually going to die because the soul's eternal. On the other hand, you can't use that as an excuse to just indiscriminately kill people. It's got to be surgical killing. You're killing the bad guys, not the innocent people. So this is where everything gets confused because, like for example, most people believed that World War II was a legitimate war. You know, the United States was fighting against the evil Nazis and the evil Japanese. But then there was the Korean War, and that was the first war that the United States decided not to win. The United States was the only country that had the atomic bomb at that time. Russia was still developing the atomic bomb. China did not have the atomic bomb. So if the United States wanted to win that war, it would have been very easy. They would have thrown a couple of atomic bombs like they did in Japan, and the other side would have, capitulated. One atomic bomb in North Korea, or a few atomic bombs in China, and China would have given up also. But they chose not to do that, and because of that, the United States did not lose the war, but they didn't win it either. And therefore they divided Korea in half. And even up till today, we still have troops in Korea. That costs a lot of money to keep there's 27,000 American soldiers in South Korea. And they've been there since the 1950s. So then there was the Vietnam War. That was the second war the United States decided not to win. They could have easily won the war if they wanted to. Again, they could have thrown an atomic bomb, or they could have really put more troops there, or whatever. They could have won the war. They decided not to win the war. So then the question comes, which wars are legitimate and which wars are not legitimate? And one thing is sure, the United States fought in World War I and II, but they did not keep any territory that they conquered. They gave it all back. They got some economic benefits because whatever they destroyed, they rebuilt with American factories and American industry. So, but when you fight a war without specifically desiring to win it, then the question, whereas you're able to win it if you want to, but they decide not to win it, then the question is it actually worth it? Just like the war in Afghanistan. It's been going on longer than any other war that the United States has ever fought. But yet, they're not winning. On the other hand, Trump comes into office and he promises to destroy ISIS. And he does it. Whereas Obama was fighting ISIS for, 3, 4, or 5 years, and, then they were never defeated. In fact, they rose up and conquered land and so much, or formed a caliphate. So this becomes a difficult question. Which wars are legitimate and which are not legitimate? Sometimes countries will engage in war not necessarily to win it, but use it as a diversion, a political diversion. Many people believe that the Vietnam War was purposely fought by the United States to stop the hippie movement, and to and thus force the hippies, because they had the mandatory enlistment still in that during the Vietnam War, where you had to join. If you were a young man, you had to join the army, otherwise they could put you in jail. And they enlisted a lot of people, and one theory is that the United States specifically went to war to stop the revolt of black people in the United States. And a lot of black young men went to Korea and were killed. There were white men also, but a lot of blacks. So, which wars are legitimate and which are not? So here's an example where a war is legitimate. The Battle of Khrushchev was a legitimate war. And it's a war in which more people died than in any other war in the history of the world. 640 million people. So it was a terrible war. And it was ordained by Krishna. So this is a question that, like for example, the war between Iran and Iraq. Iraq invaded Iran. So the Iranians had a legitimate reason to fight back. And in the end, nobody won that war. They both lost. 1 million men died in that war. And in the end, no one gained any territory. So it was just basically, it was a war that was organized by the United States purposely to weaken the Arab and Islamic countries. And it worked. The United States backed Iraq against Iran. So we see it's a very, very confusing situation, especially for young people, to decide whether a war is legitimate or not legitimate. So, I mean, even the 3 wars between India and Pakistan, were they legitimate wars? Who attacked who first?
Always Pakistan.
Always Pakistan?
Yeah.
They will say always India.
Pardon?
The Pakistani people, they will say always India.
They what?
If the
Pakistan
same
is
question will
claiming
be asked to Pakistani people, they will say India is attacking at us. Like
That's
No, but
okay, but
So for
the
political
fact
reason, Pakistan, like let us suppose in political, if there is anything, they initiate a quarrel in Kashmir, so that the war starts, and everyone started talking about the war, and politically it's basically a political game, not a.
Three wars, Prabhu. First war is about Kashmir, second war is about creation of Bangladesh, the East Pakistan earlier it used to be called, and third war is the Kargil war.
About what?
Kargil war. Pakistani army encroached some part of Indian territory. Where the Indian soldiers fought with them and moved them back. First war is like they wanted to keep Kashmir as part of the Pakistani kingdom. It's a majority of Muslim population.
But they're still fighting that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the king was a Hindu king. So he wanted to keep that piece of land as an independent country. Initially he did not join India or Pakistan.
Oh.
So Pakistanis, they sent some tribals in the border areas. They provoked them against the king. They created a revolt. At that time, when king is losing the control, then he took the help of Indian Prime Minister. So Indian Prime Minister sent the army and they moved the Pakistani people. So at that time, this UK and US, they intervened and said that, hey, when Indian army captured all the territory and they went into Pakistani area, then they came back and did the mediation. They did not solve the problem. They wanted to leave it like this, means they are raising fire. They just put a line of control. That is what is causing present day issues also. Both sides exchanging fire and
It was just an arbitrary line.
arbitrary line. That's it. There is no border. When India is winning, then these people came for mediation. Okay, stop fighting, then we will do the mediation. And
Which
they-
people came?
In UK and US.
Oh.
They
Not
brought
the
in-
Pakistanis.
Hmm?
Not the Pakistanis.
Pakistanis anyhow, they were favoring Pakistan. At
They
that
were
time.
favoring Pakistan, yeah.
And second war is like the Bangladesh, wherein the Pakistan is this side and Bangladesh is this side. It is part in between
part
the
of
India.
Pakistan.
So Pakistani army, what is that? Aircrafts are flying over India, which is a security concern. This one was politically motivated by India, I should say. So, and they are treating the Bangladeshi people as a second-grade citizen because they are not physically connected with Pakistani land, and they are ill or mistreated. So, therein the Indian Prime Minister intervened. It was a little political drama. They don't want to have that security concern. So they supported the revolt of Bangladesh, sent the army, fought with Pakistan. That was made as a separate country. This is second war. The third war is more legitimate. When the Pakistani army encroached, our intelligence agencies failed to detect that encroachment. They realized it late. It was also said that the BJP at that time, they purposefully let the folks come in. Then they started the war and to gain some patriotism or to raise or provoke patriotism amongst the citizens so that they can gain
Yeah,
knowledge.
that's the whole point. So, you know, it's hard to figure out if a war is legitimate or not. Sometimes, like in this case, it's a legitimate war. Other times, they're political or, let's say, you know, personal interests.
But Prabhu, like lot of the wars, Palestine, Israel, everything, it is said that all the weapon industries, they instigate such a controversies or conflicts between two nations, two regions, two groups or sects so that they can do their
Sell their arms.
If there is a complete peace, all these industries will be shut down and there is no work for them.
Yeah. Okay, so
Isn't it true that from spiritual, from Bhagavad Gita perspective, we say that war is legitimate only if it is fought for devotees. Like Krishna wanted Pandavas to fight because Pandavas were unjust to Pandavas. So it was more for justice for the Pandavas only. So if something God is fought among non-devotees, then it's anyways illegitimate.
Yeah, but Muslims say they're devotees.
But they are not devotees by Bhagavad Gita standards.
But they say they are.
Actually, Mataji, at that time the population is so high, and it was said that Bhumata was praying Krishna to reduce the population
okay.
count because it's lot of sin, lot of people and lot of sins they are doing. So that is one way to keep the population under control.
Yeah, I mean, some wars are legitimate, like when you had the Muslim invasions of India, right? The Indians had a legitimate, but they didn't really fight in the beginning. They didn't start fighting until Shivaji really got involved.
It was more like we are divided into separate individual kingdoms, Prabhu. There is no unity amongst the kings to fight against one common enemy. So that was the reason. Like somebody is fighting in my neighboring kingdom, I use it to keep quiet because I am safe. So that kind of mindset caused a lot of.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so did we read this? Yes. So this purport is concerned about war and killing. In the Manu Samhita law book for mankind, it is supported that a murderer should be condemned to death so that in his next life he will not have to suffer for the great sin he has committed. So, now many states in the United States have eliminated the death penalty. Right? So, is this right or wrong? It's wrong. But yet they'll make these emotional arguments out. It's cruel, it's unjust,
Humanity.
it's not Christian, Christianity you have to forgive, blah, blah, blah. You see. So, I don't know, is capital punishment permitted in India?
Now they are also, even a terrorist who attacked our parliament, he was kept in jail for 4 years, fed all sorts of food, and finally he was hung.
Finally?
Finally he was hung, but he was kept in prison for 4 years. The guy who attacked the parliament and killed several people, so not parliament. Taj, yeah. They killed hundreds of innocent people. Such as a terrorist was.
And what was his name?
Kasab.
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 Kasab. You know what kasab means in Urdu? Butcher.
Yeah,
He did the same.
Yeah. Kasab. And you have the same word, kasai.
Kasai.
Yes,
In
kasai.
Telugu there is Kasai.
Yeah.
So India, yes, there are some human rights people, like they're idiots or dumps, they still say that capital punishment should be gone away and we need to feed a person who is doing all sorts of sins.
Yeah. But see, in the United States,
No, I think he has treated with the international treaties. It's not because of
Okay.
India. Yeah, so if there is the foreign person comes in, it's not because of Indian rule, it's a rule of what are the treaties they have with the United Nations, how you treat for,
well,
the
but
same
they killed
thing
him. They killed him anyway.
Yeah,
But
kill him, but
No, but wait a minute. Let's talk about him. Wait a minute. Now, I don't think he got bitten
yeah.
by some kind of mosquito, and he was destined to die anyway.
No, he may be different then.
Are you sure?
Maybe different person what you are referring to.
Uh,
Indian origin, those who are doing wrong, they are not getting capital punishment.
Oh, they do.
Not
They
all
do.
of them.
No, not
They
do.
do in terrorism when
Not
Pakistan.
terrorism.
Why is this
No, no,
terrorism?
she's talking about
Rapists
ordinary
are there,
murderers.
big time rapists are there, they are not getting any punishment.
No, there are
Absolutely not. They should be like hung immediately.
not immediately, but they are getting.
no,
But
is
if
there
they are
capital
just
punishment in
those are
India?
there like just free.
Yes.
Privilege
It
is
is
Yes.
there. It is
In
there.
fact, when the
As per
terrorist
the
encounter
constitution,
happens,
yes.
I mean, it takes time
Yeah.
and it's in very limited and few cases, but it is not abolished.
As
So
per
it's
constitution,
there.
it is there.
It
It's
is there, far and few. far and few though.
And does anyone has the power? President has the power to
I mean, the
Excuse
pardon,
them,
yes,
yes,
they can
pardon.
in
grant
the
pardon.
constitution, I think we have that.
Yes.
But like in terrorists, like in Punjab, when terrorism was at peak, they used to have fake encounters. They will make them run and shoot them. I don't know. It might be happening in Kashmir. I have no idea. But in Punjab, I know.
Oh, that's different. That's
No, that was allowed by the government. They said okay.
It's
It's
not
out of,
by government, but it's unofficial, yeah.
Yeah.
unofficial. That's why.
yeah.
Indian law system, Prabhu, not upgraded to the recent crimes. It was written 40, 50 years ago, and then they are still following it.
No, but they are passing the laws in a lot of.
So here it's saying in the Manusamhita, the law book for mankind, it is supported that a murderer should be condemned to death so that in his next life he will not have to suffer for the great sin he has committed. Therefore, the king's punishment of hanging a murderer is actually beneficial. Similarly, when Krishna orders fighting, it must be concluded that violence is for supreme justice, and thus Arjuna should follow the instruction, knowing well that such violence committed in the act of fighting for Krishna is not violence at all, because at any rate the man, or rather the soul, cannot be killed. So for the administration of justice, so-called violence is permitted. A surgical operation is not meant to kill the patient, but to cure him. Therefore, the fighting to be executed by Arjuna at the instruction of Krishna is with full knowledge, so there is no possibility of sinful reaction. So you see, it's very easy to misinterpret this or misuse it. And you get some clever speaker and you can convince people to unjustly go to war or to kill someone. And this is the problem. That's why unless someone is a genuine devotee, it's very easy to misuse all these principles that are being explained here. Okay, so now we'll go to the next verse. Vasam sijirnani yata vihaya yata vihaya navani grinanti naro parani tata sarirani vihaya jirnani anyami samyati navani dehi Vasamsi, garments, jirnani, old and worn out, yata, just as, vihaya, giving up, navani, new garments, grinati, does accept, nara, a man, aparani, others, tata, in the same way, sarirani, bodies, vihaya, giving up, jirnani, old and useless, anyani, different, samyati, rarely accepts, navani, new sets, dehi, the embodied. Translation: as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. Please repeat. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. Report by Srila Prabhupada. Who wants to? Somebody read.
Change of body with atomic individual soul is an accepted fact. Even the modern scientists who do not believe in the existence of the soul, but at the same time cannot explain the source of energy from the heart, have to accept continuous changes of body which appear from childhood to boyhood and from boyhood to youth and again from youth to old age. From old age, the change is transferred to another body. This has already been explained in the previous units. Transference of the atomic individual soul to another body is made possible by the grace of the super soul. The super soul fulfills the desire of the atomic soul as one friend fulfills the desire of another. The Vedas, like the Mundaka Upanishad, as well as Svetashvatara Upanishad compared the soul and super soul to two friendly birds sitting on the same tree. One of the birds, the individual atomic soul, is eating the fruit of the tree, and the other bird, Krishna, is simply watching his friend. Of these two birds, although they are same in quality, one is captivated by the fruits of the material tree, while the other is simply witnessing the activities of his friend. Krishna is the witnessing bird and Arjuna is the eating bird. Although they are friends, one is still the master and the other is a servant. Forgetfulness of this relationship by the atomic soul is the cause of one's changing his position from one tree to another or from one body to another. The jiva, soul, is struggling very hard on the tree of the material body, but as soon as he agrees to accept the other bird as a supreme spiritual master, as Arjuna agreed to do by voluntary surrender unto Krishna for instruction, the subordinate bird immediately becomes free from all lamentations. Both the Mundaka Upanishad and Svetashvatara Upanishad confirm this. Samane Vikshe Purusho Nimagno Vishaya Sochati Mukhya Manaha Jushtam Yada Pashyati Anyam Isham Asya Mahimanam Iti Vita Shokaha. Although the two birds are in the same tree, the eating bird is fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness as the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way or other he turns his face to his friend, the Lord, and knows his glories, at once the suffering bird becomes free from all anxieties. Arjuna has now turned his face towards his eternal friend Krishna and is understanding the Bhagavad Gita from him. And thus, hearing from Krishna, he can understand the supreme glories of the Lord and be free from lamentation. Arjuna is advised herewith by the Lord not to lament for the bodily change of his old grandfather and his teacher. He should rather be happy to kill their bodies in the righteous fight so that they may be cleansed at once of all reactions from various bodily activities. One who lays down his life on the sacrificial altar or in the proper battlefield is at once cleansed of bodily reactions and promoted to a higher status of life. So there was no cause for Arjuna's lamentation.
This is what the Muslims are telling their young jihadis. If you die, killing the infidels, you're going right to heaven. And you become a Paki, pure. It's like Pakistan, the land of the pure. You kill the Indians, you become pure. You go to Jannat. So you can see how this knowledge can be misused very easily. So what is Krishna's trying to do is trying to convince Arjuna that there's nothing wrong with killing the enemy, even though the enemy are your relatives, because they're on the wrong side, you're on the right side. So Krishna can do that, but can ordinary people do that? That's where the problem comes. Like, I'm sure in North Korea, their army are brainwashed, their soldiers are brainwashed to think that, they're on a holy crusade to fight the evil Trumpians. And then the United States is convinced, North Korea is an evil state, and they should not have the atomic bomb. So, for the bystanders watching this thing happen, it can be very confusing to know, who's telling the truth. So you can see why Arjuna, in the case of Arjuna, you can see clearly he's confused because he has both sides of his family on the battlefield. But in a case like America against the Nazis, well, the Nazis were very evil people. Right? America against ISIS. ISIS were very cruel, mean people. So you could say, fighting ISIS, fighting the Nazis, or even fighting the Japanese, they were very cruel and evil also. But in order to defeat them, the Americans had to do evil things. From the point of view, if you look at what they did to Germany and the Japan is horrible. They completely destroyed Germany. Right? How the German people recovered is a miracle. You know, so many German men died, and so many women were widows, and kids grew up without fathers. And it's a miracle that they developed so much after that war. And the same thing in the Civil War. I mean, the North decimated the South, destroyed it completely. You know, killed so many people and burned down all their farms, and it took them years to recover, you know, after that war. And people are still upset today because they lost so severely. You know. So, you know, but who is on the right side and who's on the wrong side? This is a big question. You know.
To find out.
Well, not really, but you would have to, you know, have a deep understanding of Krishna consciousness to find out. You know. There definitely are some legitimate wars, definitely, and there are definitely many illegitimate wars. And they're both.
So, Prabhu, I have a question.
Yes.
So, when British were ruling India at that time,
Yeah.
was it legitimate that Indians should have fought against British? Because my point is that Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, even at that time when he was preaching, he said, Prabhupada, don't be a nationalist, don't go after independence, because India eventually will get independent, do your Krishna consciousness. So though from material point of view it looks like it was...
Did he actually say that?
Yeah, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said that to Prabhupada.
Who said it? What?
Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj.
I don't think he said exactly what you said.
Not exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but
Yes.
I read in Lilamrita that...
No, Prabhupada, when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur told Prabhupada, you should preach in English to the Western world, Prabhupada said, who will listen? Who will listen to a subjugated country? Right?
Yeah.
And then Bhaktisiddhanta said, look, politics will go on forever, but Krishna consciousness is much more important. He wasn't talking about this side is legitimate or that side is not legitimate. He said politics will go on forever, but Krishna consciousness is much more important. He should cultivate. And because of that, Gandhi himself organized a protest in front of the Gaudiya Math in Calcutta, because so many young men, qualified young men, were joining Bhaktisiddhanta. So Gandhi's people and Gandhi himself organized a protest. And when they told Bhaktisiddhanta, he said, just ignore them. You know. If they want to talk to you, he said, just ignore them. I don't want to talk to them. And they eventually went away. So, now, and even in the United States during the Vietnam War, Prabhupada tried his best to exonerate devotees from going into the American Army and fighting in Vietnam. So, yeah.
Yeah, good, sorry.
So there are definitely some legitimate wars, and definitely many illegitimate wars, and to be able to figure out which is which. Like one question I had when Ayatollah Khomeini was in Iran, right? He came back to Iran, he led the revolution against the Shah, and they won. I was always wondering what Prabhupada would have said about Ayatollah Khomeini. I was trying to think, what would Prabhupada think about this man? Because, he was supposed to be a holy man. And he, toppled the Shah. But then afterwards, the way he dealt with the Shah's people and the way he, and then what happened is after that, there was a war between Iraq and Iran. I mean, so many things happened. And I was always, wondering, how would Prabhupada look at this? Ultimately, there are situations in which it's like 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30 or 80-20. Partially correct, partially incorrect. Right? So unless we can determine something as 100% correct, there's going to be doubts in our mind about whether we should engage or not. Therefore, there are 6 types of enemies that are defined in the first chapter, and that's a beginning point to understand whether a war is legitimate or not. Which one?
Okay.
Where is that? 6 types of enemies.
One 36.
146?
36.
Oh, 36, yeah, that's it. You want to read that?
The verse and the translation and the purport?
Just the purport.
Just the purport? Okay. According to Vedic injunctions, there are 6 kinds of aggressors. Poison giver. Number 2, one who sets fire to the house. Number 3, one who attacks with deadly weapons. Number 4, one who plunders riches. Number 5, one who occupies another's land. And number 6, one who kidnaps a wife. Such aggressors are at once to be killed, and no sin is incurred by killing such aggressors. Such killing of aggressors is quite befitting any ordinary man, but Arjuna was not an ordinary person. He was saintly by character, and therefore he wanted to deal with them in saintliness. This kind of saintliness, however, is not for a Kshatriya. Although a responsible man in the administration of a state is required to be saintly, he should not be cowardly. For example, Lord Rama was so saintly that people even now are anxious to live in the kingdom of Lord Rama. But Lord Rama never showed any cowardice. Ravana was an aggressor against Rama because Ravana kidnapped Rama's wife, Sita. But Lord Rama gave him sufficient lessons, unparalleled in the history of the world. In Arjuna's case, however, one should consider the special type of aggressors, namely his own grandfather, own teacher, friends, sons, grandsons, etc. Because of them, Arjuna thought that he should not take the severe steps necessary against ordinary aggressors. Besides that, saintly persons are advised to forgive. Such injunctions for saintly persons are more important than any political emergency. Arjuna considered that rather than kill his own kinsmen for political reasons, it would be better to forgive them on grounds of religion and saintly behavior. He did not, therefore, consider such killing profitable simply for the matter of temporary bodily happiness. After all, kingdoms and pleasures derived therefrom are not permanent, so why should he risk his life and eternal salvation by killing his own kinsmen? Arjuna's addressing of Krishna as Madhava, or the husband of the goddess of fortune, is also significant in this connection. He wanted to point out to Krishna that as husband of the goddess of fortune, he should not induce Arjuna to take up a matter which would ultimately bring about misfortune. Krishna, however, never brings misfortune to anyone, to say nothing of his devotees.
Yeah, so this is... It begins by being very specific about when violence should take place in a defensive way. And then it makes the point that Arjuna is trained as a Kshatriya, so he should not take the position of acting like a saint. But yet, Arjuna is considering that he should act like a saint because saints are supposed to forgive. So it's convenient for him to forgive the Kauravas and that way avoid fighting. Right? So you see, it takes a lot of careful thought to figure this out, you know. Although what Arjuna is thinking seems to be good, but it's a violation of his duty as a Kshatriya. So, should the Kshatriya act like a saint? No. Kshatriya's duty is to fight for the principles of religion. So now you'll be seeing that all the different nuances of understanding come into play. And one has to be highly evolved spiritually to be able to figure all this out. Otherwise you just get confused. So there is legitimate reasons why people can go to war, or countries can go to war. So if Pakistan invaded India, or if the Hindu king of India asked India to help him against the Pakistanis who invaded his country, then it looks like it's a legitimate situation, you know. Or if India was secretly helping Bangladesh revolt against Pakistan, that's right on the borderline now. It's not sure if that was, and I also read that the Indian soldiers did not use their uniforms, but went into Pakistan, you know, like ordinary citizens of the country, and fought against the went into Bangladesh and fought against the Pakistani army. So, you know, all that raises a lot of red flags, where the, you know, you say it's politically motivated, right? So there's an example where it's like, you know, it's not clear. And then, what was the third one?
Kargil war.
What was that one about?
They encroached, Pakistan encroached India.
So
Borders.
even though any mini war happened, India never encroached anybody's land. That is history proven.
Yeah.
That's not exactly true.
No, I mean,
That's
even-
true. India
yeah.
never attacked any other
Any other
any country or taken
Not
anybody's
officially,
land.
but they did helping Bangladesh.
No, Bangladesh, so they give their own country to Bangladesh. India could have easily taken up the whole Bangladesh for India, but they didn't. They keep their sovereignty as a separate entity for themselves.
Well, yeah, but it was in their in his interest.
Interest, yeah. I mean, if you may not want to occupy the land of a poor country, economically it may not be beneficial for you.
No, it's
That
not.
is not.
The reason was both
I'm
sides.
just giving the reason that it may
It's
not be-
politically motivated to weaken Pakistan, and not to have Pakistan on both sides. Yeah. So it was definitely in India's advantage. Yeah. Anyway, you see, there are very many, you know, gray areas here. So it's best to just, you know, look at what are the definition of 6 types of aggressors that can be killed. In other words, those are 6 reasons. Like Rama went to war because his wife was kidnapped, right? And he killed Vali because Vali basically kidnapped Sugriva's wife, right? So those are clear-cut situations. Whereas, you know, the Kargil war, yeah, that's
The Bangladesh.
Bangladesh war is a little bit suspect. Okay, so we see that it's very difficult sometimes to understand what is right and wrong. But if we carefully read Bhagavad Gita, and especially Mahabharata, we'll get a clearer idea. Mahabharata especially goes into very details about subtle situations, you know, in human relations as well as political relationships and so forth. Okay, so are there any other questions? We'll stop right there and continue next week. You're on verse what? Which verse are we on?
221, 222.
22.
22 finished.
Yeah, 22 finished, so 23.
Yeah. So, let's see, for next week, let's read ahead of time 23, 24, 25, and 26. Those are what we're going to discuss next week, and read them ahead of time, and be prepared to defend or defeat No, be prepared to convince a person about the existence, an atheist, about the existence of the soul.
Atheists, don't they believe that the soul and body are different?
Atheists don't believe in God.
God is okay, but
that's
at
it.
least
Yeah.
do they also argue that the soul is not there, the body itself is?
I mean, I don't know if they believe or not.
Okay.
They believe that the body and
Well,
soul,
I mean,
but
do
they
some
don't-
research,
they-
do some research. But be prepared to convince another person that the soul exists.
We need to find atheists.
Atheists, no, atheists do not believe, most atheists don't believe in the soul. They just believe in the body.
No,
So
they
you have to
don't believe
convince
the
them.
existence of superpower or God exists. That's
Yeah,
what they,
but
they
they
say
al-
that
they
there
also
is like a
believe-
soul and body.
There's, what?
Yeah, they believe the dead body and the existing, living.
No, but, okay, well, you do this research. Do atheists believe that there's a soul? I don't think so. But be prepared by reading the next 4 verses to defend, to be able to convince a person that the soul exists and have rational arguments or rational explanation. Okay? In fact, okay, Suresh, you be the atheist next week.
Yes.
Okay? You study the atheist point of view.
Yeah, I will read from
And he will present the atheist point of view, and you have to defend.
Everybody.
Yeah, everybody need to convince me. I am not
Okay.
going to believe it.
It will be a good conversation.
My
So it depends on how well you prepare and how well we prepare. I mean, if you prepare really well and if you don't prepare, then I mean,
Well, at
the
no
conversation
point-
will not be good.
At no
If you
point
prepare well,
atheist
you
can,
prepare well.
atheist can change the truth, right? And the truth always will win.
No, I mean, as long as Suresh Prabhu as an atheist is open-minded, we should be able to convince him. If he says, no, everything is random, then it kind of comes to like a what do you say, deadlock or a stalemate. Like, okay, if you come
Give
to
you a
like,
race.
everything is random,
It's more difficult for me to get into that atheist shoes.
so yeah. One question, Prabhuji.
Yes.
How to develop or how to improve our listening ability so that we can focus, we can intently listen and not like you are talking, my mind is somewhere else, not happen like that. I know it's practice over the time it takes, but what are the things that I should do to improve my listening?
Well, let's say, I mean, this is just hypothetical. Let's say you have a really bad accident and you almost die. Would you be able to listen better after that?
I don't know.
You don't know.
You have close encounter with the death, then your attention will be, you will get very serious towards your life. Is that what I'm saying?
Yes. Would you?
Yes.
Would you?
So if you have very a close encounter with the death, so then but now you have somehow you are saved. So obviously your attitude towards a life and death will be completely different.
Not to everybody.
Mataji, one thing is that for limited time, yes,
Yeah.
but as I progress further,
you will
that attention will slowly go away.
Not only Prabhu, not only
Just like Prabhuji, like, I think I know one person, I mean, I'm not being a judge or in any shape, manner or form. I know a person, he had a close call in terms of a close accident. I don't know him very well, but it was long back and I think he's back to normal life, meaning just like any other ordinary person would be, it's the same way. I don't know him very well to say whether he pays very close attention to it or not, but that's my reading. That's my reading, so it could be wrong.
No,
But
Prabhuji, what you ask is also my question. It's like sometimes even though I try very hard to listen continuously, but there will be certain times when my mind
yeah,
is
it
gone.
goes away.
And I have to give you action.
And then sometimes I don't even remember. I have to bring it back. Like I'm totally gone.
No, but
Even I had that question I
Yes.
wanted to
So I
ask.
want
let's
to
go back
improve
to
my
the
listening.
question. Let's say that you had a near-death experience. Would you hear better next time?
Possibly yes.
You understand the value of life.
Then you start thinking seriously. Right? Then anything which seriously will not really.
But the thing is, like, it's not like I'm not taking this seriously, but it's just, I'm listening. I know in my heart that I have to listen well, but still it goes here and there and bring it back, listen, goes again, brings back. So I want to improve that listening ability to be with you, to be with what the speaker is talking about all the time, and not be have to go somewhere else, come back from listening point of view. So what should I do in terms of to be able to hear better, to be able to listen better, be present all the time, and not just physically but actually be
You have to be motivated.
motivated.
You have to see the value.
See the value.
Now, that's why why would a person value life? Well, the real reason to value life is it's an opportunity to prepare yourself to go back to Godhead. Now, do you consider going back to Godhead more important than anything else in life? No. Therefore, your hearing ability is impaired. Until you become convinced that that's the real goal of your life.
Yes.
Like, for example, why did people do the Shrud ceremony? I mean, they have a ceremony like that in Christianity also, and I'm sure they do in Islam. Because you love your relative that died. And you're duty bound to do something to help them. So the Shrud ceremony gives you a chance to offer your collective good deeds to your relative. Do you do the Shrud ceremony for a neighbor?
No.
Because you don't have that developed love or conviction that you want to help the neighbor. So now, why would you develop an avid desire to listen? Well, if you actually love yourself, you love your relationship with Krishna, then you would really want to listen. So that you could develop the consciousness to go back to Godhead. What is this and what is that?
Prabhu, this is farm milk, that is khajur milk, dates milk.
You mean there are dates in it?
Yeah, but that's not farm milk.
Anyway, I can't have all this stuff. I'll just